Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I watch things and blather on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today we're starting our look at mermaids in popular culture by looking at the 1984 film Splash, starring Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, along with John Candy and Eugene Levy. This is the first in a couple of films and other works we're going to cover to compare mermaids in popular culture to their more mythic ancestors. Now, Splash was produced by Disney, although it was originally pitched to United Artists, who passed up on it. There were several other studios who said no. Afterwards, the premise was adjusted from a mermaid trying to learn how to live in New York City to a romantic comedy. Disney, at that point, took over and released it through Touchstone Pictures, a film label created to release films that were too adult for the Disney banner. It was the first film to be released by Touchstone Pictures with a budget of $11 million. Today that'd be $33 million. And it grossed about $69.8 million, or about $208 million in today's money. And it was the 10th highest selling movie in 1984. So, good pick by Disney. Just like how Disney wasn't the first studio approach for this, neither Mr. Hanks or Miss Hannah were the first choice for the leading roles. There was an entire circus cast of actors that were offered this role or passed up on it, including for the lead Chevy Chase, Bill Murray, Michael Keaton, and John Travolta were all offered this role before Mr. Hanks got it. As for our mermaid character, the role was offered to Sharon Stone, Diane Lane, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus before going to Miss Hannah. John Candy was actually trying out for the role of the film's antagonist, but during the interview process, the producers and the director watched him go through 11 rum and cokes while still being fun and charming and not getting, shall we call it, sloppy in deference to our dread Lord algorithm. And that kind of led them to believe that Mr. Candy would be a better fit for Freddie Bauer, the older brother of Mr. Hanks' character. Mr. Candy accepted this and then suggested Eugene Levy, who quite frankly knocks his role out of the park. In fact, I'm going to say pretty much all the actors do a pretty good job here, and I'm going to get more into that in a bit. The film is about a young man named Alan, played by Tom Hanks, who is doing pretty well in life except for one issue. He's unable to keep a romantic relationship going, and a large part of that is he doesn't seem to feel any real emotional connection to any of the ladies he tries to have a relationship with. Now, this might be because he's hung up on a young mermaid he met at the age of 8 after falling off the ferry to Cape Cod. And he can't even admit to himself that the mermaid was real, so working out that set of emotions is going to be difficult. Especially in the 1980s, where the idea of processing your emotions would be met with an extra large drink and possibly a knock to the head. Well, after his latest girlfriend takes off, declaring herself done with this cold, distant relationship, and having to sit through a co-worker's wedding, ooh, that's a rough day, I'm gonna be honest, he decides to head back up to Cape Cod, where he manages to have another near-death experience in the water and is somehow rescued by the same blonde mermaid, only this time all grown up and played by Daryl Hannah. He doesn't recognize her because she can turn into a human being, complete with legs, just by drying off. Whew. Man, Ariel would be so pissed about this. Miss Hannah's character doesn't even have to make a deal with a sea witch. She can just do this. While Alan doesn't recognize her, she recognizes him somehow and finds his wallet somehow in the middle of the ocean and decides to head over to New York City and spend 6 days with him expressing her affection? Yes, affection. That's what I'm gonna call it to avoid our dread overlord's wrath. Expressing her affection for Alan. She's in a bit of a hurry though, because if she stays past the full moon, she will be forever stranded on dry land. I will note that Miss Hannah and Mr. Hanks do a really great job with their facial expressions and body language, convincing me that these are two people who are incredibly into each other. Alan finally feeling that connection on his fridge, in the elevator, and many places throughout his apartment, is desperate to make this relationship permanent. Meanwhile, the love of his life just wants to squeeze in as much time as she can before she is forced to go home, and is trying to keep her whole mermaidness a secret. Now, just a quick note here, the mermaid does adopt the name Madison, and a fun bit of trivia, Madison was chosen because that was a street sign they were walking past when Alan was asking her name, and she just picked that. Before this movie, Madison was almost unknown as a first name, and was more often used for men than girls. It would explode in popularity in the year 1985, a year after the movie appeared, and as of 2021, it's the 29th most popular name for baby girls. Congratulations, Miss Hannah, you have single-handedly brought a name into popularity. Alan receives unconditional love and support towards this goal from his brother Freddie. Now, I want to talk about this a bit. Freddie, in the hands of a less charismatic and gifted actor, would honestly come across as slimy and scummy. When we meet him as an adult, he's coming into work late. Granted, he's the owner of the business, so it's not like he can be fired. And he's super excited that Penthouse magazine has printed a letter he sent in. He's so excited that he's bought a stack of penthouses and is handing them out to everybody. He also admits to lying to a prospective client, telling them that Alan is a wounded Vietnam veteran in order to get their business. And he has this really, honestly, kind of disgusting habit of dropping quarters so as to be able to look up women's skirts. We're also told he's been married several times, and the last marriage didn't work out because, well, for starters, he took a date to his own wedding. But John Candy plays him so affably and, to be honest, is so kind of supportive of his brother. And there's also little scenes in the movie, like where he goes in to hug a woman and she non-verbally says no, and he just backs off, that you're left feeling that Freddie is really just this immature goof of a guy who does desperately need to grow up, but isn't a terrible person. And John Candy really just nails this role, but I just have to mention, this film really works because of the effort the actors put in. Levy, Mr. Hanks, Miss Hannah, all really threw themselves into their roles, and you see that in the film. So that's a mark in the movie's favor, I feel. Now, I'm sure a lot of us would think this film's plot sounds complicated enough, but the film also has a human antagonist, a Dr. Walter Kornbluth, who is a thoroughly unpleasant man who also happens to be a scientist. I will say that's one thing I didn't like about this movie. Every scientific character is either a completely unpleasant screaming rageaholic, like Walter, or a cold, borderline psychopath who's willing to murder and cut apart a young woman because she has fish fins instead of legs. So when the angry doctor sees Madison under the water swimming along as a mermaid, he devotes himself to hunting her down in New York City when he sees her on the front page, because she chooses to emerge on Ellis Island in her birthday suit, and that makes the New York Post, because of course the New York Post has nothing better to talk about. So his rather comedic rampage to soak her, because if she gets wet enough her legs turn into a fishtail, helps drive parts of the movie. Now, I do want to talk about the mermaid tail because it is a practical effect since it's 1984, and it's incredibly well made and looks very realistic. It was created by Robert Short and was basically handcrafted for a very delighted Miss Hannah from what I could find. Although she admits it was a pain to put on and take off, to the point she couldn't take it off to have lunch, and her co-stars were reduced to dropping fries into the tank where she was sitting in to feed her like she was some sort of pet sea mammal. A couple extra notes here that I found interesting. The original tail was going to be dolphin-styled and colored, as Mr. Short felt that making her look like a sea mammal made more biological sense, if you will, especially since apparently the mermaid's native language is very similar to dolphin calls. But the film director overruled him, knowing that the color of the tail would make it incredibly hard to see in the underwater scenes, and asked for something very bright and colorful, perhaps based on a tropical fish. So Madison's tail is bright red. Mr. Short, seeing the films, would later turn around and say the director was completely right. A dolphin tail would have been practically invisible, so he was at peace with the decision. One more thing I want to note. Miss Hannah had been swimming with her legs bound together since she was a child because she really wanted to be a mermaid. So when they put the tail on her and let her go, she was able to outswim the safety team, which is a team of trained divers, and ended up doing all of her own underwater stunts. So every scene you see of her swimming around underwater, she is in fact underwater. She would say later in an interview she took the role because she always wanted to be a mermaid, and mission accomplished. But getting back to the movie, things turn serious when Walter manages to hit Madison with enough water while she's attending a fundraising dinner where the President of the United States is in the room. Alan took her on a date to go see the President because he thought that would really impress her and convince her to marry him. So, as you can imagine, when Madison is publicly exposed, the Secret Service rather quickly nabs everyone, and after like 2 days of testing, the scientist in charge decides to murder her and cut her open. Now, to Walter's credit, this causes him to flip out because while he is very devoted to science and he wants to know everything he can about Madison, he also recognizes her as a fellow sapient being who has rights, and one of those rights is to, not be dissected before her time. So he gets thrown out of the facility, which is some sort of government facility with, I think I'm supposed to believe they're Marine guards, but in all honesty, the professionalism is more along the lines of National Guard, but I'm going to let that go because it's a movie. Alan hunts him down while he's at a dentist office. This movie really does set up really great scenes, even though you're kind of asking yourself, how did we even get here for some of them? And they make an alliance to free Madison, and with Freddy's help, they come up with a patented 1980s harebrained scheme to save Madison that they just barely pull off. But in the end, to escape their pursuers, Alan decides giving up on the land and stay with his one true love under the sea.
Under the sea. Under the sea.
No! Wrong movie! We're not there yet! I mean, I honestly was lukewarm toward this part because to me it made no damn sense. I mean, this is a being clearly capable of communicating with humans, so why the rush to murder? Both the military and the intelligence community would actually be against this because Madison would be their only source of information. And before those of you in the comments start going military/spies bad, put yourself in this situation. A being of unknown power and intent, capable of changing shape, was within 20 feet of the President of the United States and was only exposed because of one lunatic with emotional problems and a hose. This is the kind of thing nightmares are made of. The military would want to know, what are their abilities? How many of them are there? What are their intentions? How many of them are in the United States and allied nations right now? And could you blame the military or the Secret Service for wanting to know this? I know I'm incredibly overthinking the situation, but it's a part of the movie where I almost hurt myself eye-rolling. All my nitpicking aside, this movie is actually fairly fun to watch. It's lighthearted and straightforward, and I did enjoy it. I did think Alan and Madison were rushing their relationship quite a bit here, but this is kind of an artifact of its time and its place, so I'm not going to be too critical. I am going to be slightly more critical of the fact that there are some plot holes here, like characters just seem to be able to find each other as if driven by homing instincts, and there are some events that just seem to happen because of plot. So I can't in good faith give this an A or B grade. This would be like a C+ movie for me. On the flip side, the movie also avoids a lot of terrible cliches that I hate, and I like that Madison had actually decided to come clean with Alan before getting sprayed, but just never got the chance to get him alone and just tell him. And while Alan is understandably shocked, I don't blame him for having some trouble with this, because he finds out his girl is a mermaid, gets kidnapped by the Secret Service, thrown naked into a tank of water, and has to discuss this with her while in captivity, and that would make anyone cranky. He probably didn't have a lot to eat in the preceding day or so he was held prisoner, so he was probably hangry as well. I don't blame him for having a couple bad moments here. And honestly, neither does Madison, proving the character is a very forgiving kind of person, but when your boyfriend comes swinging in to apologize while saving your life from maniacal government scientists bent on cutting you open, maybe forgiveness is easy to extend. The movie also fits fairly well into various themes we've seen in myths we've covered. Mermaids being able to change into human shape, being very affectionate towards certain human men, taking their chosen spouses to underwater magical kingdoms, and having the ability to quickly learn human language and blend into human society. So, I don't think the movie actually changes too much of mermaid mythology, although it does add a time limit to Madison's ability to pose as a human, to add some urgency to the story and increase the narrative weight of Alan's choice to go with her. So I can understand why that was added in. Compared to the sheer violence done to Greek myths by Hollywood, this is honestly nothing, so I'm not even going to be bothered by it. Also, if I'm going to be honest, I think we've established that mermaid myths aren't exactly uniform anyways. Moving on, before I wrap up the video, there is one last thing I want to touch on. Something that the film seems dead set on hiding from us. That is the fact that Madison is a sorceress, a wizard, or possibly a sea witch. Some of you might be wondering why I'm saying this. Let me set out the evidence here. First, there's the fact that she's able to find Alan's wallet in the middle of the damn ocean. A wallet he dropped while drowning before she found him. She's also able to read his license well enough to figure out he's from New York City, find a shockingly well-preserved map in a sunken wooden ship dating at least a couple years back, and use that map to map out a course to New York City and get there in under a day from Cape Cod, which is 250 miles away from New York City. She's also able to do all this without speaking a single word of English. That's not a problem since she can learn English from about 6 hours of watching random television. Now, some of you might be saying, well, maybe she's just that smart, and I certainly don't think Madison is stupid, but she's not a genius either. You see that in the movie. Now, you can hand-wave that away, but let me throw this out as well. During the date, Alan takes her to a park and shows her a rather large mermaid fountain made out of stone and brass. And he said he always liked this fountain, but it was going to be torn down and destroyed, and that made him a little sad. The very next day while he's at work, Madison somehow gets this fountain out of the park, into his apartment building, and into his apartment on the 4th floor, into his living room, with no one noticing, no damage to the building, and it looks like doing this while keeping the fountain in a single piece. This is sorcery. This is quite possibly blatant witchcraft. Lastly, the movie shows Madison grabbing Alan, who can't swim, and pulling him from New York Harbor down to tropical seas without stopping in under a day. She outruns a helicopter while towing a full-grown man who can't swim. I dare you to come up with any explanation for those that doesn't involve magic. And some of you are going to say, Garvin, this is a movie, and my response is, this stuff still has to make sense in the context of the movie. And the only way that happens is if Madison is a sorceress and the movie is hiding this from us. I rest my case. Having gotten that off my chest, I think I'll stop here before pleasant men in nice suits with little mouse buttons on the lapels show up at my door. Let me just say I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, comment, or even subscribe. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. I'd like to give special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. I hope you enjoyed this, big guy. Join me next week as we go a little harder into the horror aspect of mermaid mythology by looking at the Polish movie The Lure. I hope you join me, but until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.